The one thing I wish everyone would disclose along with their art is how long it took to make. I find myself assuming there is no one in the entire world quite as slow as me. Yeah, very imposter syndrome-y, and let's be honest, kind of self-centered, but that's just where my brain goes, unfortunately. And since I wish more people would openly talk about the time aspect of their process, I'm going to lead by example and give you more insight than anyone probably gives a shit about into the process of making this render in Unreal Engine 5. For context, I work as a 3D artist professionally, but Unreal Engine 5 was basically new territory for me. And here's how it went. On day 1, which was totally not last August, I spent about 3.5 hours planning which models I would need and modeling most of them in Blender. At the end of the day, I had this. On day 2, I spent 1 hour planning the trim sheet with which I would later texture everything in my scene, modeled the high poly version of the trim sheet, and baked it onto a plane in Substance Painter. I'm pretty sure on or around this day, I spent another hour or so creating my Substance Designer material and testing it in Painter. I have no footage of this for some reason. On day 3, which was totally not 4 whole months later in January, I spent 2 hours working on the texturing of the trim sheet in Substance Painter, and then I started UV unwrapping and applying the material to as many models as I had the patience to unwrap, which was maybe a third. On day 4, which was totally not, just kidding. In January, I locked in. This was the very next day, and I spent 6.5 hours UV unwrapping the rest of the models, creating my scene in Unreal, adding the first models, and getting the scene to look like this. This day made me think that finishing the rest would take no time at all, since it felt like half of the scene was already done. This, of course, was very wrong. It's day 5, and I spent about 10 minutes making actual changes to the scene and an hour and 20 minutes trying to set up a camera to match the concept art's perspective. Since I was failing miserably at that, I made the concept art show up as an overlay on the camera view to help me match things up. This somehow didn't help me at all, but in the process I learned that I could pin the camera view so that I could see the final angle at all times, which did help. On day 6, I spent 1.5 hours working mostly on the right side of the building and laying pipe. The scene went from this to this today. On day 7, I spent another 1.5 hours just adding stuff to the scene. I also realized some proportions were off, so I changed the scaling of the arch, for example, and went from this to this. On day 8, I worked on my scene for 3 hours and 15 minutes. A large chunk of this time was spent trying to fix a mistake I made at the beginning of the project where I didn't realize that I should have been exporting my models directly into the project structure, which meant that I couldn't reload my assets easily. My fix failed, and I ended up with all my models in the project twice. Whoopsie! I also actually made some progress after that. On day 9, I spent about 5 hours fixing more proportion issues, and finally tackling the left side of the scene. I even did a teensy bit of terraforming in preparation for the grass. I tried and I failed at getting the terrain to use a section of my trim sheet so that I could say I only used the one texture set. I ended up having to make a separate simple grass texture set, which made me a pretty sad Sydney. On the 10th day, I only worked on the scene for about half an hour and mainly fixed more issues with sizing and positioning of entire chunks of the building. I advise putting the time into a thorough block-out phase to figure these things out before you have a million little pieces in your scene. And I also terraformed a little bit more. On day 11, I woke up at 5 a.m. with the brilliant idea to Google how to get rid of keystoning, which I know from photography, within Unreal Engine, and immediately had to try it before going to work. This finally got the perspective to an acceptable level for me, but also meant some rearrangement was necessary. On day 12, I worked for 2 hours and 15 minutes on more scene building, mostly on the right side of the render, including adding the bridge in the background. On day 13, I spent 5.5 hours on this shoot. I had to model some more random stuff I was missing, added some fog, and finally made myself tackle adding grass and the pine trees, which I did in the most loveless manner I could think of, apparently. On day 14, I spent 1 hour painting an entire skybox, only to then realize that only about a 20th of the skybox would be visible in the render, and what was visible was not detailed enough to match the concept. Time well spent. It's day 15 and I spent about 2 hours working on the skybox again, even though current day me knows I'm going to paint over all of this again on another day. I also terraformed some more and made some random adjustments here and there. On day 16, I spent another 2 hours adding more random details, lighting, and light blockers to specific little areas, and I rendered the first versions of the scene, which looked like this, and I hated it for some reason, which is maybe why day 17 happened 3 months later, and all I did was spend 2 hours fixing the skybox again, and adding birds here and there, and then boom, I was done! It was totally worth it to procrastinate the entire project for 3 more months as if there was still so much to do. Whatever. This puts me at a total of 42 hours spanning from August 2025 to April 2026. And the truth is, I probably spent more time on this. This is just the time I recorded. This video feels really random to make since I'm not really teaching anything or whatever. It's seriously just a video I wish other artists would make. Oh my god, especially people making substance designer materials. I don't know, I'm always so curious and have no clue how quickly others work. Anyway, if you made it to the end, it would really help me out if you told me a bit about your own experience creating digital art. Is my time frame relatable at all? Also, you know what? Go finish your dusty-ass project sitting on your hard drive. You'll feel so much better after. Bye!